Thank you very much for joining us today for a demonstration of the Pi travel solution. Now, in order to give a concise high-level overview, we're going to focus on three specific areas. Those are going to be predictive analytics, looking at how travel managers can leverage actionable intelligence to provide insights around policy and drive behavioral change. We're then going to look at how machine learning and data consolidation can help you take control and visualize your spend more accurately. And then we're going to look at a comparatively new area of traveller return on investment, looking at how by integrating data sets that aren't traditionally within the travel sphere, you can get a better picture of how travel touches the wider organisation. Now, first of all, we're going to look at the performance dashboards. This is a tool that's used by many of our clients as a response to trying to go over and above what in the travel industry are often known as lost savings reports. Now, these are not always particularly actionable, and the way that we see it, if it's not actionable, then it's not worth reporting on. These are some of the typical KPIs that organisations typically can report on and control within their organisation. And what we're seeing here is a spread of compliance across different business areas for a specific target. So on the top right hand side, we can see that there's a target of 70%. Any organisation that's green is above that target, and we're seeing there's a potential savings of $5 million if we were to be hitting that. Now, what we want to be able to do in this situation is ask the question, if this was your own company, which departments are performing badly, and how can we help them to improve? So let's look at the sales department. It's typically one of the worst performers in most organizations. And then we can see that there's actually the online booking tool usage down here on the bottom left-hand side. There's only 41%. That's all very useful, and you could by all means go out and reach out to the sales director and say, please increase your online booking tool usage. But where this becomes more interesting is when you're able to give them a specific figure of how much you'd save if you were to do that. So let's look at online booking tool usage here on the right hand side and change the target to 82, which is roughly double. It is double of the, or 81, let's go with that, of the target, and then we click on sales. Then we see that the savings that you can make are $0.5 million. Now that becomes powerful negotiation material for internal sales. We know that the travel manager's role is expanding, and by being able to go to business unit heads and say you could save $500,000 by changing this one small simple thing, how many sales would you have to make before you're making a net saving of $0.5 million? This is relatively simple. Let's look at what we can do over the next 3 months. And some of our clients, such as Mondelez, have been pioneering this approach to really engage and drive behaviour throughout the organisation. And because fundamentally, there's no real point in having a particularly good hotel program if you're not able to push your travellers there. So that's one example of how I think we're really changing the kind of the dynamic within organisations in the travel sphere. Now, the trip analysis side, what we're about to see is one of the most common problems that travel managers have. We often find that many of the companies we work with, the travel manager and the whole travel team are spending far more of their time looking at and trying to consolidate different data streams rather than actually using their traveller expertise. And the situation we're going to be looking at here is an example of exactly one of those key problems. We can see that there are 3 separate sources, the TMC, card and expense data, for this one specific traveller for one trip between Nuremberg and Tokyo. Now, the most important thing to remember here is that we're not just looking at just when the outbound flight went and when the return flight came back. We have to be looking at things like, was there a taxi beforehand, was there a meal before the flight, and we use machine learning to aggregate all those spend to get all that spend together, and that is using probabilistic rules, which we can talk about in a bit more length at a later date. But fundamentally, we group them together using a trip ID, and we put all this spend into one trip. Now, one of the key areas where we find that people have the most trouble identifying spend and consolidating spend is when you have a booking that looks like this. This is a hotel booking. We can see the total amount that's been consolidated in the end has been $788, but there are 3 separate amounts on the TMC expense. Maybe the expense, there was Wi-Fi, breakfast that was included on policy, and then there's a different amount on card. Maybe that was cocktails, dinner that were not within policy. But if you try and aggregate all of those into a database or an Excel file, that'll look like 3 separate amounts. Very likely it's invoiced at 3 separate times, and potentially even with 3 separate hotel names. We all know that the problem is there. So by integrating and consolidating that data and cleansing it, you actually look, you can see that you're only spending $788, where otherwise you'd be spending around 2,500. And that deduplication often helps companies gain around 5 to 10% savings across the travel program. It's around 1 in 6 bookings, I think, in the hotel sphere that are either changed, adapted, or cancelled. So what the analysis that we just saw enables you to do in a bit more detail is identify specific travellers and identify how they can change their trips to be a bit more on policy and be a bit more effective. Now what we're seeing here in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen of this chart are different travellers where each dot represents a traveller. Most of the travellers are in the bottom left-hand corner, relatively few trips, relatively low cost, as you can see on the two axes. But it's these travellers in the top right-hand side where we want to be looking at a bit more detail. Again, you can see each trip is broken out by trip ID and by destination, and all the different transactions are broken out by expense category and with the supply name. And this enables you to dive a lot deeper into their behaviour rather than just taking averages, as many companies do at the moment. We can see that this traveller is often using car rental. Maybe that's an example to kind of dive a little bit deeper into. You can see there's a £5,000 flight on this and in this example there. Was that warranted for a trip of this length? These are the sorts of questions that you can begin to ask and engage with those specific travellers to dive a little bit deeper. We're now going to look at the traveller experience report, which we'll be using with some of the consultancy firms that we work with. And this is an area where we're looking at how the effect of a good travel program actually really touches the business, because currently it's not all that easy to convince the finance director where the return on investment's coming from. Is travel just a black hole, which is just a necessity? How can we demonstrate that having a better program and treating the travellers better rather than just feedback surveys, which don't always translate to the bottom line? How can we demonstrate that quantitatively? So what we're doing here is integrating sales CRM data alongside the TMC data to show how the traveller experience across a range of KPIs, which we've illustrated down here at the bottom in the bottom of the chart, looking at jet lag, class, day, was it a weekend, and how that affects sales performance, and also project days. So in this consultancy example, now what we're seeing here is a trip count increase of 37% across 2014-15, and the days abroad are only 16%, so there's not matched, and there's more time zones crossed. So what we're seeing is more trips that are getting squeezed, and they're going longer distances. What we're seeing between 2014 is actually a decrease in sales. In some departments it's quite dramatic, and we can see that actually potentially this is to do with the overall traveller experience that's being affected. If we look into a particular department that's done particularly poorly, we can see on this chart the blue dots represent sales trips and the beige dots represent project trips, with many sales and project trips under this line of 0 where that would represent an average traveller experience. We're seeing that it's actually becoming more difficult to sell work. You see sales trips that were clearly unsuccessful in this area. And this is just looking at the North American side of the business. You can see on the right hand side. All the reports that we have, you can drill down right down to department, you can drill down to the country, and they're all very tactile. And they're all able to be adapted to a bespoke approach. But fundamentally what we're seeing is how the travel experience is making the work more hard to sell. Perhaps this was a strategic move to move out to North America, but it isn't working in the way that it was. So that hopefully provides a bit of a taster for the demonstration of what we'd like to say, but please do get in touch with us over the website in order to arrange a full demo and see how we can help you. Thanks.